My name is Zektar, and I have seen many ridiculous things in my 400 cycles of existence, but nothing, and I mean absolutely nothing, prepared me for what I witnessed at the Galactic Combat Academy on Station Kronos 7 last rotation. Let me paint you a picture of this place. The Academy is supposed to be the most elite training facility in 3 spiral arms. We are talking about an institution where only the strongest, most lethal species in the galaxy send their finest warriors. The entrance exam alone has a 60% mortality rate, which the administrators proudly display on holographic banners. Walking through the main corridors, you would see the cream of the galactic crop. There are the Thoraxians standing 8 feet tall with exoskeletons that can deflect plasma rounds. Their mandibles can snap through titanium like it is brittle candy. Then you have the Kronak warriors, built like walking mountains of muscle and bone, each one capable of bench pressing a small spacecraft. Do not even get me started on the Vorganian hunters, whose razor-sharp claws and lightning reflexes have made them the most feared predators in known space. Each species brings something terrifying to the table. All the Zephyrians, my own people, possess psychic abilities that can crush minds from 50 meters away. The crystalline-skinned quartzites can literally turn their bodies into living weapons, sprouting spikes and blades at will. Even the smaller species like the Nexari have venomous bites that can drop a full-grown Thoraxian in seconds. And then there was the human. Riley Patterson, 5 feet 6 inches of what appeared to be the most pathetically fragile creature ever admitted to the Academy. When she first walked into orientation, I genuinely thought someone was playing an elaborate practical joke. She looked like she was made of soft pink clay that might crumble if you sneezed too hard in her direction. The girl had no visible weapons. No claws, no fangs, no natural armor plating. Her skin was absurdly thin, practically transparent in places where you could actually see the blue lines of her circulatory system. She had tiny, flat teeth that looked suitable for nothing more dangerous than chewing vegetables. Her limbs were stick-thin compared to any reasonable warrior species. But the most laughable part? Those ridiculous little appendages she called hands. No talons, no spikes. Just 5 soft little digits that looked like they had never held anything more threatening than a writing implement. I watched other students literally point and snicker when they saw her trying to grip a standard training weapon. The thing was almost too heavy for her to lift with both hands. The Academy staff seemed just as baffled by her presence. Apparently, some sort of interspecies exchange program had gone horribly wrong, and Earth had somehow convinced the admissions board that humans deserved a spot among the galaxy's apex predators. The paperwork had already been processed, the fees paid, so they were stuck with her for the full term. During the first week, betting pools opened on how long the fragile Earthling would last. Most gave her 3 days before she requested transfer to a nice, safe botanical research station. The optimists wagered she might make it a full week if she avoided any actual physical contact with her classmates. Riley seemed completely oblivious to the attention. He attended lectures, took notes with those pathetic little fingers, and even raised her hand to ask questions in that ridiculously soft voice of hers. She acted like she belonged there, surrounded by creatures that could literally tear her apart without breaking stride. Looking back now, I realize we should have paid more attention to her eyes. While the rest of her appeared laughably delicate, there was something in those brown eyes that should have warned us. Something patient, something waiting. But we were all too busy laughing at the fragile human to notice. Advanced combat simulation was held in Training Bay 7, a massive arena, designed to withstand the kind of punishment that comes from housing dozens of the galaxy's most destructive species. The walls were reinforced with quantum steel plating, and the floor could absorb impacts that would level city blocks. Safety protocols were so extensive that even thinking about violence in the wrong direction triggered automated warning systems. Riley Patterson walked into this temple of controlled mayhem, wearing standard Academy training gear that hung on her frame like an oversized tent. The outfit was designed for species with actual muscle mass, not whatever passes for anatomy among humans. She looked like a child playing dress-up in her parents' military uniform. Instructor Gareth Thorne, a fellow Zephyrian with the temperament of an agitated volcano, surveyed the assembled students with his usual expression of barely contained disgust. Thorne had trained some of the most lethal warriors in galactic history, and his patience for weakness was roughly equivalent to a neutron star's sense of humor. "Today we practice partner combat drills," Thorne announced, his psychic voice reverberating through everyone's skull with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. You will demonstrate your species' natural advantages against opponents of varying capabilities. Try not to kill each other. The paperwork is tedious. The pairings began with predictable results. A Thoraxian cadet named Chiton Razorback faced off against a Quartzite warrior, creating a spectacular display of sparks as exoskeleton met crystalline spikes. The impact sounded like a shuttle crash, and both combatants grinned with the satisfaction of opponents who could actually challenge each other. Then came Brutus Cain's turn. The Chronic warrior stood 9 feet of solid bone and muscle, his gray hide scarred from countless battles. His species had evolved on a world where even the plants tried to kill you, and Brutus looked like he had personally wrestled every predator on the planet. When he flexed his arms, his biceps resembled small boulders shifting under granite skin. "Observe," Thorne commanded, pointing at a reinforced training dummy designed to withstand starship-grade weapons. "Demonstrate your species' natural striking power." Brutus approached the dummy with the casual confidence of someone who had never met anything he could not break. He drew back one massive fist, muscles coiling like industrial cables under tension. The punch connected with a sound like a building collapse. The dummy, rated to survive direct hits from plasma cannons, crumpled inward like cheap aluminum. The impact crater was so deep you could have used it as a serving bowl. Pieces of quantum steel reinforcement scattered across the training floor, ringing like broken bells. "Impressive," Thorne noted with professional approval. Chronac bone density allows for impact forces exceeding 12,000 pounds per square inch, sufficient to penetrate most starship hulls. The other students nodded respectfully. This was the kind of power that earned you a place at the academy. Raw, devastating force that could end conflicts before they properly began. All eyes then turned to Riley, who had been assigned as Brutus's next partner. The size difference was so ridiculous it stopped being funny and became genuinely concerning. She looked like a toothpick standing next to a siege engine. "Oh, this should be entertaining," chuckled a Vorganian student named Fang Ripper. "Watch the soft pink creature try to demonstrate her natural advantages." "What natural advantages?" laughed another cadet, an Exari whose toxic saliva could dissolve metal. "Humans do not even have proper claws. What is she going to do? Nibble someone to death?" The mockery spread through the class like a virus. Students began making exaggerated comments about human ferocity and their devastating lack of natural weapons. Someone suggested Riley might overwhelm opponents with her ability to leak salt water from her eyes when frightened. "Perhaps she can defeat enemies by showing them how pathetically weak she appears," suggested a Thoraxian, mandibles clicking with amusement. "They might die from laughter." Through all of this, Riley stood quietly beside the demolished training dummy, her expression remaining perfectly calm. If anything, she seemed mildly amused by the commentary, like someone watching an entertaining but predictable comedy routine. Her brown eyes held that same patient quality I had noticed before, as if she was waiting for something specific to happen. "Silence," Thorne commanded, though even his psychic voice carried traces of skepticism. "The human will now demonstrate her species' combat capabilities." The laughter died down to expectant snickers. Everyone wanted to see what kind of pathetic display the fragile earthling would provide for their entertainment. Riley stepped forward, flexing those ridiculous little fingers, and smiled. Before Riley could approach the training dummy, a shadow fell across the arena floor. The temperature seemed to drop several degrees as Razor Blackfang stepped forward, his massive form cutting through the assembled students like a predator moving through tall grass. Razor was a Vorganian, and Vorganians were the stuff of nightmares across 17 star systems. Standing 7 feet tall, his body was a masterpiece of evolutionary murder. Obsidian black scales covered corded muscle that rippled with each movement. His elongated skull housed a brain designed for one purpose: calculating the most efficient way to kill anything that moved. Twin rows of serrated teeth gleamed like polished daggers, and his eyes glowed with an internal fire that had been the last thing countless prey species ever saw. But it was his claws that truly marked him as an apex predator. Each finger ended in a curved talon longer than Riley's entire hand, sharp enough to slice through starship hull plating like tissue paper. Those claws had been honed by millions of years of evolution on a death world where only the most lethal survived to breed. "Instructor Thorne," Razor spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floor plates. "Perhaps this would be more educational if the human faced a proper challenge." The mockery in the room shifted to something darker. When a Vorganian suggested a proper challenge, it usually meant someone was about to become a cautionary tale. You see, Razor continued, circling Riley with the fluid grace of a born hunter, my species has held the title of Galactic Apex Predator for over 50,000 years. We were hunting across star systems when most of these other species were still learning to make fire. Vorganian hunting packs have brought down creatures the size of small moons. He paused directly in front of Riley, towering over her diminutive form. The size difference was so extreme it looked like a starship facing off against a maintenance drone. Our reflexes are 15 times faster than baseline humanoid standards, Razor explained with predatory patience. Our strike force has been measured at over 20,000 pounds per square inch. Our claws can penetrate quantum steel armor. Our bite strength exceeds that of industrial crushing equipment. Riley looked up at him with what appeared to be polite interest, as if he was giving a lecture on agricultural techniques rather than describing his capacity for violence. And humans, Razor continued, his voice dripping with amusement, are prey animals, soft, slow, defenseless creatures that evolved by running away from anything dangerous. Your species survives by hiding behind technology because you lack any natural weapons whatsoever. The other students were eating this up. Even the Kronak warrior Brutus nodded approvingly. This was the kind of species comparison that made sense to everyone present. Predator versus prey. Natural selection in its purest form. I propose a friendly demonstration, Razor announced, his glowing eyes fixed on Riley's face. Nothing lethal, of course. Just a simple sparring match to show the class the difference between a true apex predator and... He gestured dismissively at Riley. Whatever this is supposed to be. Instructor Thorne's psychic presence sharpened with interest. This was exactly the kind of educational brutality he appreciated. The combat parameters will be non-lethal engagement only. First to achieve submission hold or force opponent outside the combat circle wins. Around the arena I noticed Academy staff members beginning to place discreet wagers. The betting was not about who would win, that was painfully obvious, but rather about how quickly the human would surrender or lose consciousness. 10 seconds. Whispered a Thoraxian instructor to his colleague. The human will not last 10 seconds against a Vorganian. You are being generous, replied an Exari combat specialist. 5 seconds maximum. Probably less if she actually tries to fight back instead of just curling into a ball. Even the automated medical systems began powering up, anticipating the need to treat severe trauma to the human student. The arena's emergency protocols activated, ready to deploy force fields and medical drones, the instant Riley's vital signs indicated serious injury. Razor flexed his claws experimentally, each talon extending to its full terrifying length. The sound they made scraping against each other was like metal grinding against stone. I will try to be gentle with you, little human. Perhaps you would prefer to simply concede now and save yourself the embarrassment. For the first time since entering the academy, Riley actually laughed. Not a nervous giggle or frightened whimper, but a genuine, amused chuckle that somehow managed to carry across the entire arena, despite her soft voice. That is very thoughtful of you, Razor, she said, rolling her shoulders in what looked like a casual warm-up stretch. But I think I will give it a try. You know how humans are. We never learned when to quit. The confidence in her voice was so unexpected that several students actually stopped laughing. There was something in her tone that did not match her appearance, like hearing a shuttlecraft engine roar coming from a toy model. Razor's eyes narrowed with predatory focus. Very well, little prey animal. Let us begin your education. Riley stepped into the combat circle, still smiling. The combat circle activated with a soft chime, creating a translucent energy barrier that would contain the violence within acceptable parameters. Razor Blackfang stepped into the arena like he was entering his natural habitat, which, considering Vorganian evolution, was probably accurate. He began with the traditional intimidation display that had terrorized prey species across the galaxy for millennia. His scales shifted to a deeper black, indicating heightened aggression. Those terrifying claws extended to their full length, each one gleaming like polished obsidian. He opened his jaws wide enough to reveal rows of serrated teeth that could have doubled as industrial cutting equipment. The sound he produced was somewhere between a roar and a snarl, a bone-deep rumble that triggered instinctive fear responses in every species present. It was the kind of noise that made prey animals freeze in terror, while their brains processed the fact that death was approaching at high velocity. Riley Patterson stood perfectly still during this display, watching Razor with what appeared to be academic interest. She did not freeze, flinch, or show any of the expected prey responses. Instead, she tilted her head slightly, like she was studying a particularly interesting specimen. "Fascinating," she murmured, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "The intimidation reflex is remarkably well developed in your species." Razor paused mid-roar, clearly not expecting commentary during his terror performance. This was supposed to be the part where his opponent either surrendered immediately or stood paralyzed with fear. "Let me guess," Riley continued conversationally. "The scale color change indicates increased adrenaline production, probably triggered by specialized glands near the spine. The claw extension is likely controlled by hydraulic pressure systems, and that delightful sound comes from resonating chambers in your throat structure." The arena fell silent except for the hum of the containment field. Riley was treating a combat encounter like a biology lecture and somehow making it sound reasonable. Razor recovered his composure and lunged forward with blinding speed. Vorganian reflexes were legendary throughout the galaxy, capable of striking faster than most species could even perceive movement. His claws swept toward Riley in an arc that should have ended the fight before it properly began. And Riley was not there. She had moved, somehow flowing sideways like liquid mercury. The motion was so smooth and effortless that it took several seconds for my brain to process what had actually happened. Razor's claws, those legendary instruments of death, slashed harmlessly through empty air. "Interesting technique," Riley observed from her new position, 3 feet to the left. "Your species relies heavily on overwhelming initial strikes, does it not? Very effective against most prey animals, I imagine." Razor spun with predatory fury, launching another attack sequence. This time he used a combination of assault, claws, and teeth working in coordinated strikes that had dismantled armored vehicles. It was a display of lethal artistry that should have turned any opponent into decorative ribbons. Riley moved again, and again. Each time she seemed to flow around his attacks like she was dancing to music only she could hear. She was not just dodging randomly either. I began to notice patterns in her movement, calculated angles that positioned her exactly where Razor's momentum could not immediately follow. "Your strike patterns are quite predictable once you establish the rhythm," she commented, still sounding like she was conducting a peaceful academic discussion. "Claw, claw, bite. Pause for repositioning, then claw, bite, claw. Very efficient for standard prey responses, but perhaps a bit systematic." The confusion in the arena was palpable. This was not how combat was supposed to work. Apex predators did not get analyzed by their prey. Organians did not miss their targets, and humans certainly did not move with that kind of fluid precision. Razor's frustration was becoming visible. His scales darkened further, and his movements grew more aggressive. He abandoned technique in favor of raw speed and power, launching himself at Riley with the kind of berserker fury that had conquered worlds. Riley stepped backward, forward, then sideways in a sequence so quick it blurred together. Razor hit the arena floor hard enough to crack the reinforced surface, his claws leaving deep gouges in quantum steel plating. "You know," Riley said thoughtfully, "your species probably evolved on a world with relatively predictable prey animals, creatures that followed standard flight patterns, right? Always running in straight lines when frightened." She paused to consider this while Razor climbed back to his feet, rage building in those glowing eyes. "Humans evolved differently," she continued. "We had to deal with predators that were faster, stronger, and better armed than we were. So we learned to think our way out of problems instead of just running or fighting directly. The pieces were starting to fall into place in my mind, and I did not like where they were leading." Riley was not just randomly dodging. She was studying Razor, learning his patterns, adapting her responses in real time. Every attack he launched gave her more information about his capabilities and limitations. "The interesting thing about human evolution," Riley said, still moving with that impossible fluid grace, "is that we became persistence hunters. We did not need to be faster or stronger than our prey. We just needed to be smarter and more stubborn." Razor launched another furious assault, this one lasting nearly 30 seconds of continuous attacks. Claws and teeth carved through the air in patterns complex enough to challenge a computer's tracking systems. Riley moved through it all like she was swimming through water, never quite where the attacks landed, always positioned to make his next strike slightly more difficult. When Razor finally stopped breathing heavily from exertion, Riley was not even winded. "Are you starting to understand?" she asked gently. For the first time in galactic recorded history, a Vorganian apex predator looked uncertain. What happened next violated several fundamental laws of physics, common sense, and everything we thought we knew about the universe. Razor Blackfang, increasingly frustrated by his inability to land a single blow on the impossibly evasive human, decided to end this embarrassment with one final overwhelming assault. He gathered himself into a crouch, every muscle in his 7-foot frame coiling like industrial springs. His claws extended to maximum length, his scales shifted to combat black, and his eyes blazed with predatory fury. This was going to be the kind of attack that left crater-shaped impressions in reinforced bulkheads, the kind of strike that Vorganian legends were built upon. He launched himself forward with enough force to dent starship armor, covering the distance to Riley in a blur of motion that should have been faster than human reflexes could possibly track. Riley waited until the last possible microsecond, when Razor was committed to his trajectory and could not possibly change direction. Then she did something that defied everything we understood about human anatomy. She stepped forward to meet his charge. Not backward, not sideways, not into some clever evasive maneuver. Forward, directly into the path of an apex predator moving at lethal velocity. Her right hand, that ridiculously small appendage with its pathetic lack of claws or natural weapons, drew back in what appeared to be a simple punching motion. Nothing fancy, nothing that looked particularly dangerous, just a basic strike that any species capable of moving its limbs could execute. The impact, when it came, sounded like a shuttle collision. Riley's fist connected with Razor's chest at the exact moment his forward momentum peaked. The physics of the situation should have resulted in the human being splattered across the arena like organic paint. Instead, something impossible happened. Razor stopped. Not gradually, not with the smooth deceleration you might expect from a grappling maneuver. He stopped instantly, as if he had just collided with an immovable object disguised as a 5'6" human female. For a fraction of a second, time seemed suspended. Razor hung in the air, his expression shifting from predatory confidence to complete bewilderment. His brain was clearly trying to process what had just occurred, and failing spectacularly. Then physics reasserted itself with a vengeance. Razor Blackfang's 7 feet of apex predator perfection flew backward across the arena like he had been fired from a cannon. He traveled approximately 20 feet through the air before impacting the reinforced rear wall with enough force to trigger the facility's structural integrity alarms. The quantum steel plating, designed to withstand starship weapons, buckled inward around his body. Cracks spread across the wall surface like a spider web of impossibility. Chunks of reinforcement material rained down as Razor slumped to the floor, his eyes wide with shock and confusion. The silence that followed was the kind of absolute quiet that usually precedes major galactic disasters. 200 of the galaxy's most elite warriors, instructors, and combat specialists stood frozen in complete disbelief. Minds that had been trained to process complex battle scenarios in microseconds simply shut down when confronted with what they had just witnessed. Riley looked down at her right hand with mild interest, flexing those soft little fingers like she was checking for damage. She said conversationally. "That actually worked better than I expected." The casual tone of her voice snapped everyone back to reality with the subtlety of a plasma grenade. Emergency medical systems activated automatically, detecting severe trauma signals from Razor's position. Medical drones swarmed toward the fallen Vorganian like metallic insects, their sensors working overtime to assess the damage to what was supposed to be one of the most durable species in known space. Medical Emergency and Training Bay 7 announced the facility's AI in its usual calm tone. Multiple trauma indicators detected. Dispatching full medical response team. Through the arena's observation windows, I could see Academy staff members running toward the training bay, their faces reflecting the same stunned disbelief that gripped everyone who had witnessed the impossible. Instructor Thorne, whose psychic presence usually projected unshakable confidence, was broadcasting confusion so intense it was giving nearby telepaths headaches. His mental voice, when he finally managed to speak, carried the tone of someone whose fundamental understanding of reality had just been forcibly revised. "Medical teams to Training Bay 7 immediately," he commanded, though his psychic projection sounded distinctly shaky. Priority 1 trauma response. And someone contact the xenobiology department. We need a complete analysis of human physiology. Apparently we have been missing some rather significant details. Riley walked over to where Razor was receiving medical attention, looking genuinely concerned. Is he going to be all right? She asked one of the medical technicians. I tried to pull that punch, but human strength control takes some practice. The technician, a Nexari medical specialist, looked up at her with an expression of pure terror. You pulled that punch, he stammered. Riley nodded cheerfully. Oh yes, probably used about 30% of full strength, maybe 40. Human muscles are surprisingly efficient when you know how to use them properly. The betting pools had closed. No one was laughing anymore. As I watched the medical teams carefully extract Razor from his wall-shaped impression, a humbling truth crystallized in my mind with the clarity of vacuum-hardened steel. We had all made the same catastrophic error. We looked at Riley Patterson and saw soft pink skin, tiny hands, and the absence of natural weapons. We saw prey. We never bothered to ask the most important question: what kind of evolutionary pressure creates a species that survives without claws, fangs, or armor? The answer was terrifying in its simplicity. You become the apex predator anyway. Humans did not need external weapons because they had weaponized their entire bodies. That fragile frame was actually a precisely engineered system of leverage, momentum, and controlled violence. Those pathetic hands were not designed for slashing. They were designed for striking with the focused impact of industrial equipment. Within hours, Academy policy underwent emergency revision. Human students were reclassified from exchange participants to potential hazards. New safety protocols were implemented. Training scenarios were completely rewritten. The betting pools reopened, but now the wagers focused on which species would be brave enough to spar with the remaining human students. As for me, I learned to never judge a predator by its lack of visible claws. Sometimes the most dangerous hunters are the ones that do not look dangerous at all. Especially the ones that smile.